You will own nothing, and you will be happy. That's a real sentence that's been floating around conferences and think tanks for years. And whether people agree with it or not, a lot of young people today feel like we're already halfway there. Every article keeps saying Gen Z is just lazy and doesn't work hard enough, therefore we don't have money. But what if the real story isn't about laziness at all? Let's break it down. But first, let's change the scenery. Today we're going to answer one simple question. Is Gen Z actually terrible with money? Or did the entire economic ladder quietly move? And to help us figure that out, I brought someone with very strong opinions. Everyone say hello to Grandpa Phil. Ah, there he is. So, Grandpa, let me ask you something. Why do you think younger people today are struggling financially? Because you kids don't want to work. There it is, the classic answer. But let's test that idea. Because once you actually start looking at the numbers, things get a lot more interesting. Let's start with something simple. All right, Grandpa, since you seem so confident about young people being lazy, let's start with something simple. Housing. Housing? Easy. You just work, save up, and buy a house. All right then. Let's play a quick round and find out. First question. What do you think the average American home cost in 1960? Maybe about $10,000? Pretty close, actually. The median home price in 1960 was about $11,900, and the average household income at the time was around $5,600 a year, meaning a typical home cost just a little over 2 years of income. See? Exactly what I said! All right, now let's move forward. What do you think the average home price was around 1980? Maybe $50,000? Close. It was about $47,000. And the average household income was around $21,000. Still roughly 2 to 3 years of income. So far, my generation looks pretty good. Yeah, about that. Let's jump to the year 2000. What do you think it's on now? Well, based on the other years, I'd say about $90,000. The median house price was about $119,000. The median income was around $42,000. Still manageable, about 3 years of income. See? Same story. Now let's look at today. 2026. What's your guess, Gramps? Not more than $250,000. The median home price in the United States recently climbed to around $400,000 or more. The median household income? That's at about $74,000, meaning the typical home now costs around 5 to 6 years of income nationally. And in many big cities, it's far higher than that. Don't even bother checking the listings in California. Wait, 6 years? And that's before mortgage rates, property taxes, and the cost of living. So when people say young adults today can't afford homes, it might not be laziness. The math itself changed. Well, that does sound a little tougher. And housing is just the beginning. So here's the final scoreboard. And it's not looking great for modern buyers. On to the next. All right, Grandpa, time for round 2. More game shows? You seemed to enjoy the first one. Well, I was winning. We'll see about that. Let's start then. Housing, education, jobs, inflation. Let's go with education for $500. Here's the clue. In the 1980s, many public universities charged around $2,000 per year for this. What is college tuition? Correct. In 1980, average public college tuition was roughly $2,000 per year. Now let's fast forward. Here's a bonus question. What do you think the average tuition at a public university is today? What is 5,000? Try about $10,900 a year. Wait, that's more than 5 times higher. And that's just public schools. Private universities can now cost $40,000 per year or more. 40,000! Now here's where things get interesting. Student loans in the United States now total roughly $1.7 trillion. Trillion? Yup. And the average student loan borrower leaves college with about $30,000 in debt. So people start their careers already owing money? Exactly. College used to be a stepping stone. Now, for many people, it's the starting line of a debt race. Well, maybe people should just skip college then. That would be easier if most jobs didn't require a degree first. And that brings us to our next topic. Wait, what's wrong? No more game shows? Just waiting for the producers to approve the budget. But this next one doesn't really need a buzzer anyway, because it's about something a lot of people misunderstand. Wages. Oh, that's easy. People just need to work harder. That's the common argument, but let's look at what actually happened. Since around the late 1970s, workers in the United States have become far more productive. In simple terms, people today produce far more economic value per hour than previous generations. But here's the strange part. Productivity has increased by about 70% over the last few decades. Real wages? They've only grown by roughly 15 to 20% for the typical worker. Wait, so people are producing more, but their paychecks didn't grow the same way? Exactly. Well, maybe young people just need better jobs. That's another part of the puzzle. Starting a career today is often harder than it used to be. After the financial crisis in 2008, youth unemployment in the United States climbed to nearly 20%. Even today, entry-level jobs are far more competitive than they used to be. More degrees, more applicants, and many positions asking for years of experience before you even start. And some companies even post jobs they aren't actively hiring for, just to collect resumes or test the market, or just as a tax write-off. So people are competing harder for the same starting line? Pretty much. Which means many young workers are earning money later, saving later, and trying to buy homes later. And when you combine that with rising costs, things start to add up. Damn. Speaking of rising costs, I think the producers finally approved the budget. Now we're talking. All right, Gramps, top 5 answers on the board. We asked 100 people a simple question. What drains your money the fastest every month? Eating out? Good guess, but not on the board. All right. Gas? Show me gas. Cars, insurance, gas, repairs. Getting around isn't cheap anymore. All right, 4 answers left. Okay. Rent? Show me rent. Housing costs have exploded across the country. In many cities today, people are spending 30 to 40% of their income just on rent. 40%? Next guess. Groceries. Groceries. Food prices in the United States have jumped dramatically. In fact, grocery prices have risen more than 20% since 2020 alone. Yeah, I noticed that one. 2 answers left. Healthcare? Show me healthcare. Back in 1970, Americans spent about $300 per person each year on healthcare. Today, it's over $13,000 per person. 13,000? And one final answer left on the board. Student loans? Student loans. Millions of people are still paying for their education long after they graduate, sometimes for 10, 20, even 30 years. All right, I'll admit it. That's a lot of bills. And when you stack all of those costs together, it's not hard to see why people feel like their paycheck disappears the moment it arrives. But the story doesn't stop there. On top of everything mentioned so far, something else has been quietly happening in the background for decades. Assets. Assets? Things like houses, stocks, investments, basically anything people own that can grow in value over time. All right, and what about them? Well, here's where things get interesting. Over the last 40 years, the value of many major assets has absolutely exploded. Let's take the stock market as an example. Back in 1980, the S&P 500, one of the main stock market indexes in the United States, was sitting around 120 points. Today, it's over 4,000. Wait, seriously? Yep. And housing values followed a similar path. Homes that cost around $100,000 in the 1990s can now be worth 3, 4, sometimes even 5 times that amount, depending on the area. So, if someone bought a house or invested money back then, those assets grew dramatically. Which means many people who already owned assets saw their wealth increase massively over time. But if someone didn't own those things, then they didn't benefit from that growth. And that's where the gap starts to appear. Because when assets rise faster than wages, the people who already own them get richer, while everyone else has to work harder just to keep up. Well, that explains a lot. And lately, there's been another shift happening too. Something that connects all the way back to the very first line of this video. This one may confuse you. Ownership. Ownership? For most of the last century, the goal was pretty simple. Work, save money, buy things. A house, a car, maybe some investments. And over time, those things became yours. But recently, more and more things have started shifting away from ownership and toward access. Access? Monthly payments, subscriptions, services, streaming, software subscriptions instead of buying programs once. Even gaming is moving in that direction, with services like PlayStation Plus, where people pay monthly instead of owning individual games. And companies are increasingly experimenting with subscription-style computing through services like the upcoming Windows 12. So, instead of buying things, people just rent them forever? In many cases, yeah. Not because people suddenly decided they love subscriptions, but because ownership itself has become harder. When housing is expensive, education is expensive, and everyday life costs more, owning major assets becomes harder for a lot of people. So people don't necessarily want to rent everything, but sometimes it's the only option available. And when you step back and look at everything we talked about today, housing, education, wages, cost of living, assets, you start to see a bigger picture. Things really did change. And the strange part? It's not just happening in the United States. Wait, really? Yep, a lot of the pressures we talked about today are showing up all over the world. Housing, cost of living, and even job competition. All right, prove it. Let's take a quick look around. First stop, the United Kingdom. In the UK today, the average house price sits around £300,000 or $400,000. The average yearly income, roughly $34,000, which means buying a home often costs about 10 times the average salary. 10 years of income! And it's not just the UK. Let's head a little further south. Australia. In cities like Sydney and Melbourne, homes can easily cost $900,000 Australian dollars, or $630,000, if not more, while the average income sits around $90,000. So that's like 10 years of income as well. Pretty much. And Canada isn't much different either. Average homes there are hovering around 700,000 Canadian dollars, with average incomes around 75,000. So housing pressure isn't just an American thing. Exactly. But housing isn't the only global pressure. Let's talk about everyday costs. Oh boy, here we go again. In recent years, many countries have seen sharp increases in the cost of basic necessities: food, energy, transportation. Let's go back to the United Kingdom for a moment. During the recent energy crisis, some households saw their energy bills double in just a few years. Double? Yep. So everywhere you look, things are getting more expensive. Pretty much. Different countries, different economies, but a lot of the same pressure. And the final piece of the puzzle? Jobs. Let me guess, that's getting harder too. In many places, yeah. Youth unemployment has been a major challenge in several parts of the world. Take countries like Spain and Greece. At certain points over the past decade, youth unemployment there climbed above 30%. 30%! Meaning nearly 1 out of 3 young people couldn't find work. And even in countries with stronger job markets, competition for entry-level positions has increased. More applicants, more degrees, and more requirements just to get started. So, starting a career isn't as simple as it used to be. Tell me, have you ever heard of the Ouroboros? The dragon that eats its own tail? Yup. What's that got to do with anything? Think about this for a second. In the last few years alone, many major companies have gone through massive layoffs. That leaves millions of skilled, experienced workers suddenly looking for jobs. And now, young people entering the workforce are competing with them. Companies hire, then cut staff, then hire again. The cycle just keeps repeating. So, the dragon is the job market? Exactly. And when you combine that with everything else we talked about today, you start to see why so many younger people feel like the system shifted underneath them. Yeah, I'm starting to see that now. But that still leaves one big question. So let's go back to where this whole conversation started. You will own nothing, and you will be happy. It's a sentence people argue about all the time. But after everything we just looked at, it starts to feel less like a prediction and more like a promise. Housing got harder to buy. Education got more expensive. Wages slowed down. Costs kept rising. Assets exploded in value. And more things moved from ownership to subscriptions. So maybe people aren't terrible with money. Maybe the rules just changed. Because the real question was never whether Gen Z is bad with money. The real question is whether the system they grew up in still plays by the same rules.